Hey guys, Graphwerfer back again. I was also going to do 5.7 as well, but I think I'll save them for next time, since that's where super props start to show up, and I think it'd be better to compare them with 6.0 planes and above. Still, 59 planes tested, each one taking a minimum of 10 minutes to just gather the data for, so even though I got a routine for it, it still took a while. Anyways, let's just get into it. Same disclaimers as before, go watch the previous videos in the series if you have no idea what I'm talking about. Here we go. The B7A2 Homare has a better engine than the Tech Tree one, so it climbs a bit better, but the turn and speed aren't affected as much as I thought they would be. The B18 is indeed lighter than the T18, so it turns and climbs significantly better than its later model, quite a big difference. The BF110C7 is also lighter, so it does turn better than the G4, but also has weaker engines and so climbs and speed's a bit worse. The D4Y3 kind of has an incredible flight performance, especially at 3.0 as a bomber. It would be 4.7 material if it had more than 7.7 machine guns. The HE219 is worse than your average heavy fighter, worse than the BF110G4 in turn and climb. It's probably 4.3 just because the Mk103 30mm shred both tanks and planes. The RE2001CB is actually exactly the same as the CN in flight performance. It looks like the change in firepower didn't add to in-game weight for the model. I wanted to test some bombers because I had a hunch that the PE8 was overperforming by a lot. Sometimes it can pull off some crazy turns, so I tested a few 4-engine bombers. The 6th order curve fitter that I used didn't like these a lot, but we'll start with the relatively normal looking Lancaster. The graph is kind of what you'd expect, just a very shrunken down diagram since bombers don't climb, turn, or speed very well. Next, the ME264. Someone said this one also overperformed, and I don't really see it. It kinda goes fast for a bomber and has good energy retention, but it turns much worse. And then there's the PE8. I think my code decided to give up cause I have no idea what to make of this. I tried retesting it a few times and it still gave me something similar. If we ignore the energy contours though, we can see that the PE8 does have a surprisingly high instantaneous turn rate of over 25 degrees per second when going 300 kph. This is a spoiler for later, but even the I225 only barely has a max turn rate of 25 degrees per second. Based on this, I'm not sure if the PE8 is unrealistic since I have no frame of reference for how it flew in real life, but it definitely has an incredibly tight turn at the right speed, especially for a 4-engine bomber. I did also try and test the B17, but the wings ripped off when I tried to pull more than 3 Gs, so I think that says enough about the plane. For this next section, I'll be comparing everything against the F8 F1 at 4.7. It's very well known for being fast, very powerful with a decent turn, so let's see how it compares to its competition. The F4U1C is a little sad at this BR, especially the climb rate. It does turn tighter than the F4U4 since it has the F4U1 airframe, but even still it flies the same, if not a bit worse than the 1D at 3.0. The F82 is quite fast, but doesn't turn very well as you'd expect from a heavy fighter. Solid climb for something with an air spawn, but turns like a Do-335 or a Focke-Wulf. The P38K is a premium at 5.3, and if we compared it to the P38L at 4.7, you can see it basically has the same profile but climbs, rates, and speeds quite a bit better thanks to its upgraded engines. Good flap usage is necessary though. The L doesn't seem to be that much of an upgrade over the J. If there is any, I can't really tell. Once again, the P47 surprised me as to how low their straight line speed on the deck is. I was expecting at least 600. I suppose they're better at higher altitudes though. Better engine means better rate, speed, and especially climb over the D25, which is nice. The N has a tighter turn circle and a higher airframe speed limit, but doesn't actually turn or speed that much better, since it's forced to carry about an hour's worth of fuel. The N does have a better high altitude performance, but it's at altitudes that are much higher than are likely at ARB. The P51D30 is quite strong, though it still gets beat by the F8F on every front except for high speed maneuvering and energy retention. Compared to the D10, it climbs and speeds better, but the difference is not by much, definitely not a 0.7 BR difference worth. The G6 is like the other 109s and is strong in low speed energy generation, though the F8's monster engine makes that kind of hard to tell. Turns worse but climbs and speeds better than the 109 F4. The G14 marginally improves climb and speed again, but the overall profile is about the same. The 109Z is a bit of a brick. It does go faster than the other 109s, but climbs worse, so the air spawn is necessary. Turns similarly to the Focke-Wulf 190s without the roll or the flaps. The Do-335A0 has a better low-altitude rear engine than the A1, making it significantly faster on the deck. Above 3 kilometers though, the A1 should be better, otherwise mostly the same. The Focke-Wulf 190 A5 is worse than the A5 U2 thanks to the extra 4 guns. Not really worth it since the 4 guns are 2 MGFFs and 2 7.7s. The A8 climbs better than the A5, but worse than the A5 U2, though it does go faster than all of them. The Focke-Wulf 190C turns tighter than all the other Focke-Wulfs and rates about the same as the U2, but climbs and speeds much slower on the deck thanks to its turbocharger. It's designed for high altitude, which you rarely get to use, but I still think the tighter turn is nice for overshoots. The D9 seems like a straight upgrade over the A8 and the U2 since it turns about the same, climbs better, and goes much faster. The D12 is slightly heavier and also has a worse engine below 5 kilometers, so turns, climbs, and speeds worse than the D9. Similar story with the D13. The Focke-Wulf 190 F8 is the same as the A8, but is lighter since it has 2 less 20mm, so in terms of the early Focke-Wulfs, the F8 is actually the best. The I225 has a very strong engine, and so climbs and rates very well, but compresses incredibly early. Frankly, the Pyramirski is on par if not significantly better on all fronts except for firepower and straight line speed. The IL-10 turns kind of okay. It's similar to the SU-6, but nothing that outstanding. It's not going to win any dogfights with actual fighters. The LA-7 is very strong. Good turn, good retention, good climb, and surprisingly fast on the deck. It is very much a continuation of the LA-5FN, having a better turn, climb speed, and compressing less. The 7B is the same, but slightly heavier, so climbs and turns a bit worse, but still plays mostly the same. The LA-11 is a much heavier version of the LA-9, which we'll cover next time, but on face value it's not very good. It turns like a heavy fighter, and the only thing I think it might have going for it is its low speed thrust, but otherwise it just goes kind of fast, and that's it. More in line with the I-185 playstyle. The SU-8 is another heavy fighter. It seems to rate and climb better than the IL-10, though compresses much faster. The TU-2S turns and climbs surprisingly well. The 44 is very similar to the base 2S, but the 59 is much heavier, so will likely perform significantly worse. Still, it could probably win a rate fight against some heavy fighters like the F82 or the Focke-Wulf 190s. The Yak-9P is heavier than the earlier Yak-9s, so turns a bit wider but has a better engine, so climbs and speeds better. It also has a higher rip speed. The Yak-9U has a similarly boosted engine, but is much lighter since it doesn't have the triple 20mm, so climbs, turns, and speeds even better despite being at a lower BR. I was also going to test the Yak-3P, but it seems like the flight model is exactly the same as the Yak-3 despite having more guns. If anything, it'll fly a tiny bit worse since it has the same engine. The MB5 has a pretty high top speed, but a pretty poor acceleration and climb. It's kind of like the Wyvern, but it climbs, speeds, and accelerates worse, and turns a bit better. I guess this isn't a premium Gaijin is eager to be selling, considering the Wyvern gets an air spawn, has better guns with more ammo, and is at a much lower BR. The Seafire F Mk XVII has a Griffin engine, so it goes quite fast and climbs okay without sacrificing much in turn, almost as well as the F Mk IX at 4.3. The Seafire LF Mk III is okay as a plane, but at the same BR, the Spitfire F Mk VC does everything exactly the same while turning and climbing better. The Mk VC is also significantly an improvement over the speed and climb over the 5B at 4.0. Its engine does struggle at high altitudes though, since it has a worse engine than the 5B above 2 kilometers. The trop is only a bit worse in climb and speed than the base 5C, so I'd say it's very worth playing at 4.7. The 4 Hispano loadout is very nice to use. The Mk 16 tanks the turn rate and circle quite a bit by chopping off its wingtips, and for being at 5.0 it doesn't go all that much faster than the Mk 5C. I think the 16 has a better altitude performance above 5k since it has a second supercharger gear though. The base A6M5 is a solid plane. Not quite as absurd of a turn as the A6M2, more on par with the Spitfires but faster than before. There hasn't been much improvement in the climb rate, so for 5.0 it's going to struggle to get to altitude. The Hay slaps on way too much weight, making it turn worse than the Spitfire and climb worse than the BF-110. Apart from its instantaneous turn, the plane really doesn't have much going for it. The Otsu and Ko are only slightly different from the base A6M5, so apart from the increased rip speed and the guns carrying a bit more ammo, they're basically the same. While marginally better, the A6M6C is in the same boat as the Hay and so struggles just as much. The A7M1 maintains the excellent turn rate of the A6M2, but it also climbs and speeds better than the A6M5s. It rolls poorly, but that gets addressed in the next variant. The A7M2 climbs and speeds much better while retaining the absurd turn rate. This plane is truly the successor of the early Zeros. The J2M2 has a very powerful engine, giving it a very strong rate and climb, but it doesn't go very fast for how strong its engine is. Across the board, it's actually very similar to the Key 44 at 3.7. This would upset me, but we haven't even gotten to the J2M3 and the M5 yet, so I'm gonna hold off on that for now. The Key 84 is a good all-rounder. Solid turn, good climb, faster than the other Japanese. You won't be able to outturn Spitfires anymore though. The Key 61-1 Hei is actually the same as the earlier Key 61s, except it's heavier thanks to the MG151s, making it perform worse than the Ko and the Otsu at 3.3 and 3.7. It's not by much, but the fact that it's the same flight model and now at 4.7 makes it a bit rough. The Key 61-2 Otsukai has a stronger engine than the earlier Key 61s, but is also heavier, so it climbs about the same, turns worse, and the only gain seems to be a limited amount of extra speed. This one's not an interceptor, so it doesn't even get an air spawn. The N1K1 Ja looks like a Key 84, but much slower. Looks like they got the same raw deal as the J2s. The BF109 G14AS has an engine tuned for high altitude above 5 km, meaning at low altitude it climbs a bit worse, but otherwise is mostly the same. The C205N2 is somehow still worse than the Serie 1, both in climb and turn, although it's not as bad as the 202EC. All the C205s have the same engine, so the only difference really is the weight. The Serie 3 is still not as good as the Serie 1, but at least it's better than the N2. I don't think the extra firepower from the 20mm is really worth the 1.0 BR increase though. The G55S is lighter than the Sotoro Series 0 at 4.3, with the same engine and so is a tiny bit better. How they managed to do that while adding 2 more 20mm is beyond me. The Tech Tree G55 Series 1 is heavier since it keeps the 50 cals from the Sotoro Series 0, and so is worse than all the other G55s. It goes a tiny bit faster, but otherwise it's not much better. I guess another over-tiered plane with more gun and worse flight performance. The VB10-02 is slightly heavier than the VB10C with the same engine, so climbs a bit worse. Okay, so that's everything. You will probably have noticed that the F8F goes faster and climbs better on the deck than everything else we've seen, even the Wyvern. Even beyond just the F8F, there are a lot of really weird BR placements, and it really makes you wonder what statistics the snail even uses to decide these. The fact that they probably don't consider player skill as a possible confounding variable feels intentional at this point, just so that they can fudge around the BRs however they want. But it's been a long week of testing and I'm tired, so I'm gonna go stare at my eyelids for a few hours. Bye.